The fading sunlight cast long shadows across Cherry Creek Park, as 8-year-old Lily Thompson spotted something unusual near the old oak tree. A German shepherd, thin, ribs visible beneath matted fur, watched her with intelligent eyes that seemed to hold a universe of pain. Despite her parents' warnings about strays, Lily approached slowly, heart pounding against her chest. The dog's collar, worn and dirty, caught her attention. K9 Unit, Ranger. This wasn't just any lost dog. "You hungry?" "Boy," she whispered, offering half her turkey sandwich with trembling fingers. The dog hesitated, then gently took the food, his trust immediate and inexplicable. "I can't take you home today," Lily confessed, tears welling. "But if you wait here, just 2 days, I promise I'll come back." What Lily couldn't possibly know was how this promise would change everything, and what secrets Ranger carried that would shatter her family's carefully constructed walls. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Cherry Creek Park had long been Lily Thompson's sanctuary, since her recovery from leukemia began 6 months ago. The sprawling green space just 3 blocks from their Denver suburban home had become the only place her overprotective parents allowed her to visit regularly. Her thin frame and pale complexion were slowly giving way to the return of childish energy, though the shadows under her eyes remained a reminder of the battle her small body had fought. Michael Thompson watched his daughter from the kitchen window each afternoon as she made her way to the park, his jaw tightening with familiar anxiety. At 42, the former Denver police officer still carried himself with the rigid posture of law enforcement, though he'd left the force 3 years ago after the incident. The incident nobody in the Thompson household ever discussed, but which had left him with both visible and invisible scars, including a pronounced limp and a steadfast rule against pets of any kind. "She's getting stronger every day," Sarah Thompson said, sliding her hand into her husband's as she joined him at the window. At 39, Sarah's work as a pediatric nurse at Denver Children's Hospital had given her a clinical understanding of their daughter's illness, but nothing had prepared her for the emotional toll of nearly losing her only child. Her blonde hair, once long and lustrous like Lily's, was now cut into a practical bob streaked with premature gray. The Thompson home was meticulous, sterile almost a necessity during Lily's treatment that had become habit. Photos lined the walls, chronicling happier times Michael in his police uniform with his K9 unit colleagues, Sarah cradling newborn Lily, family trips to the mountains before the diagnosis. What was notably absent were the typical signs of childhood: no muddy shoes, no scattered toys, and certainly no pet hair. 3 miles across town, in an alley behind the Denver Police Department's K9 training facility, a shadow of the elite police dog Ranger had once been fought for survival. His disappearance 6 months ago had made headlines briefly before being forgotten by all but a few. The German shepherd, who had once led his handler through gunfire, who could track suspects across miles, who had earned commendations for bravery, now scrounged for scraps and avoided human contact until a small, kind-hearted girl offered half a sandwich and a promise. The turkey sandwich was the first real food Ranger had eaten in days. Lily watched him consume it with the careful precision of an animal who wasn't sure when his next meal would come. Despite his ragged appearance, there was something dignified about the way he ate, no desperate gulping, just measured bites that spoke of his training. "My mom says I shouldn't touch strays," Lily confided, keeping her distance even as she longed to stroke his matted fur. "But you're not really a stray, are you? You belong somewhere?" She pointed to his collar, the letters K9 Unit still visible despite the grime. "Ranger, is that your name?" At the sound of his name, the dog's ears perked up, and something flickered in those intelligent brown eyes, recognition, perhaps even hope. It made Lily's heart squeeze in her chest. She had learned to recognize hope during her long hospital stays. It was the same look she'd seen in her parents' eyes on her better days. The park was quiet that Tuesday afternoon, most children still in school. Lily's flexible homeschooling schedule, another consequence of her illness, meant she had the playground and open fields mostly to herself. She sat cross-legged on the grass, keeping a respectful distance from Ranger as she opened her backpack. "I brought extra water," she said. Pouring some into the lid of her thermos, she placed it on the ground and scooted it toward him with her foot. "It's really important to stay hydrated. That's what my mom always says." Ranger approached the water cautiously, his body language alert but no longer fearful. As he drank, Lily noticed the way his left hind leg trembled slightly, bearing less weight than the others. He was injured, and the realization filled her with a protective surge that surprised her with its intensity. "I can't take you home today," she explained, as if the dog could understand every word. Perhaps he could. "My dad doesn't, She paused, trying to find the right words. "He doesn't like dogs anymore. Not since what happened." Lily didn't fully understand what had happened to her father. She knew he used to work with police dogs, that he'd been hurt somehow, and that afterward he'd changed. The father who once carried her on his shoulders and laughed easily had been replaced by a quieter, more cautious man who jumped at sudden noises and checked the locks 3 times before bed. "But I have a plan," she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "If you stay here, if you wait just 2 days, I'll come back with my parents. They need to see you, especially my dad." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a granola bar, unwrapping it slowly. "I think maybe you could help him, like the doctors helped me." She broke the granola bar into pieces, placing them on the ground between them. Ranger approached and ate them one by one, maintaining eye contact with her. There was an understanding between them, a connection Lily couldn't explain but felt deeply. 2 days, she repeated. "I promise I'll be back." When she finally stood to leave, the separation felt physical, like pulling apart something that should remain connected. Ranger watched her go, making no move to follow, as if he too understood the terms of their agreement. The walk home was filled with mental preparations. Lily knew convincing her parents would be the hardest thing she'd ever attempted, harder even than staying brave during the painful treatments. Harder than pretending she didn't notice how the other kids stared at her baldness when she first returned to homeschool group meetings. "Lily Margaret Thompson, where have you been?" Sarah's voice carried across the front yard as Lily approached home. Her mother stood on the porch, arms crossed, worry etched across her features. "You're 15 minutes late. You know the rules." "I'm sorry, Mom," Lily replied, climbing the porch steps. "I lost track of time." Sarah's expression softened as she placed a hand on Lily's forehead, an automatic gesture left over from months of vigilant temperature monitoring. "You feel warm. Did you wear your hat? The sun exposure?" "I wore it, Mom," Lily assured her. though the hat had spent most of the afternoon stuffed in her backpack. "I'm fine. Actually, I feel really good today." Inside, Michael sat at the dining table, his laptop open to case files from his new job as a security consultant. He looked up when Lily entered, his smile genuine but tinged with the ever-present worry. "Hey, kiddo, good park day." "The best," Lily answered, choosing her words carefully. "I made a friend." Sarah, following behind, immediately brightened. "A friend, one of the neighborhood children." Lily took a deep breath. "Not exactly. His name is Ranger, and he's a German shepherd." The change in her father was immediate and jarring. His back stiffened, his jaw clenched, and the hand resting on the table curled into a fist. "You know better than to approach strange dogs, Lily." "He's not strange, Dad. He's special. He has a collar that says Canine Unit on it, like your old friends." Lily pressed on despite the warning glance from her mother. "He's hurt and hungry, and I think he's lost." "You need to stay away from it," Michael said firmly, closing his laptop with more force than necessary. "Strays can be dangerous, especially former working dogs. They're unpredictable." "Ranger isn't dangerous," Lily insisted, her voice rising with unexpected courage. "He was gentle. He's smart and sad and needs help." Sarah moved to stand beside her husband, her nurse's pragmatism taking over. "Lily, your father's right. With your immune system still recovering, we can't risk exposure to an animal that might be carrying diseases." "Then we can take him to a vet," Lily suggested, her mind racing ahead. "Please, can we at least go see him? I told him we would come in 2 days. Michael stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "You told a dog we would come see him, Lily. It's an animal, not a person. It doesn't understand promises." "He understood," Lily said with absolute conviction. "He's waiting for us." "Enough." Michael's voice held a finality that Lily rarely challenged. "Call animal control if you're concerned. They handle strays." "They'll put him in a shelter," Lily cried, tears springing to her eyes. "What if nobody adopts him? What if they—" She couldn't finish the sentence, the possibility too painful to articulate. Sarah knelt before her daughter, brushing a tear from her cheek. "Sweetheart, I know you have a big heart, but we've talked about this. Our home isn't suitable for pets right now. It's never going to be suitable." "Is it?" Lily asked quietly. "Not as long as Dad is afraid?" The silence that followed was heavy, charged with an accusation that had never before been spoken aloud. Michael's face drained of color, and for a moment he looked more vulnerable than Lily had ever seen him. "Go to your room," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We'll discuss this later." That night, through the thin walls of their modest home, Lily heard her parents' hushed but heated conversation. Words like trauma and therapy and moving on drifted through the darkness. She clutched her pillow, making silent plans and promises to a dog who waited alone in the growing chill of a Colorado spring evening. For the next 2 days, Lily waged a careful campaign. She left printouts about the benefits of therapy dogs on the refrigerator. She accidentally played videos of canine officers reuniting with their retired partners within earshot of her father. She completed her schoolwork with unprecedented efficiency, took her medications without complaint, and even ate the steamed vegetables she usually pushed around her plate. And each afternoon, she returned to the park, carrying what food she could reasonably smuggle out of the house, whispering encouragements and promises to Ranger, who seemed to be waiting specifically for her, always in the same spot, always with that same intelligent gaze. On the morning of the third day, over breakfast, Lily played her final card. "If you come with me to the park today," she said, looking directly at her father, "just to see him, I won't ask again if you still think it's a bad idea." Michael and Sarah exchanged glances, a silent communication developed over years of parenting and crisis. "One visit," Michael finally conceded, his voice rough with emotion he rarely displayed. "No promises beyond that." Lily's heart soared with triumph and anxiety. As they walked to the park that afternoon, her parents flanking her protectively as always, she prayed that Ranger had kept his part of the bargain, that he had waited, that he would help her father see what she already knew. Sometimes the things we fear most are exactly what we need to heal. The walk to Cherry Creek Park felt interminable to Lily, even though it was the same 3 blocks she had traveled dozens of times before. Michael walked stiffly beside her, his limp more pronounced today, as it often was when he was stressed. Sarah kept pace on Lily's other side, her nurse's eyes constantly assessing her daughter's energy levels, ready to suggest they turn back at the first sign of fatigue. "He usually stays near the big oak tree," Lily explained, pointing toward the eastern edge of the park, "by the picnic tables where nobody sits because the paint is peeling." Michael nodded curtly, his jaw set in the way Lily recognized as his preparing for the worst face. It was the same expression he'd worn before her more difficult treatments, when he tried to appear strong while falling apart inside. "Remember," Sarah said gently, "if the dog isn't there, it doesn't mean he didn't want to wait for you. Stray animals have to keep moving to find food and shelter." Lily didn't bother correcting her mother's use of stray. She knew Ranger was more than that, and soon they would too. The park was busier than usual for a weekday afternoon. A youth soccer practice occupied the main field, and several elderly couples walked the perimeter path, enjoying the mild spring weather. Lily's pace quickened as they approached the oak tree, her eyes scanning desperately for the familiar shape of the German shepherd. At first, she didn't see him, and her heart plummeted. Had she misjudged their connection? Had hunger, or animal control, or some other misfortune taken him away? Then a movement caught her eye, a dark form lying in the dappled shade beneath the oak's sprawling branches. "There," she exclaimed, pointing. "That's Ranger," as if hearing his name. The dog lifted his head, ears perked forward. When he spotted Lily, he rose to his feet somewhat unsteadily. Lily noticed with concern, and his tail began a slow, cautious wag. "Stay here," Michael instructed firmly, placing a restraining hand on Lily's shoulder. "Let me approach first." "But Dad—" "Lily," his tone brooked no argument, "if this dog is a former K9, there are protocols." Something in her father's voice had changed, a shift from reluctant participant to professional engagement. Despite her impatience, Lily recognized the importance of this moment and nodded her agreement. Michael stepped forward, his security consultant's briefcase forgotten as his body language transformed. His shoulders squared, His stance widened slightly, and his right hand moved instinctively to where his service weapon would have been years ago. He approached the German shepherd with measured steps, maintaining eye contact but avoiding direct confrontation. "Ranger," he called, his voice taking on a commanding tone Lily rarely heard at home. "Stay." The dog, who had begun to move toward Lily, immediately froze at the command, his body rigid with attention. Michael faltered mid-step, visibly startled by the immediate response. "He knows police commands," Sarah whispered, her hand finding Lily's. "Your father's right. He must be a trained canine." Michael continued his approach, now speaking in low, even tones that didn't carry back to where Lily and Sarah waited. The German shepherd remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed on Michael with an intensity that seemed almost human in its focus. Then something extraordinary happened. As Michael drew within a few feet of Ranger, the dog's demeanor changed completely. His tail began to wag frantically, his body quivering with what could only be described as recognition. He lowered his head and whined a sound so mournful it made Lily's chest ache. Michael froze, his face draining of color. "No," he whispered, loud enough now for them to hear. "It can't be." He dropped to one knee, his injured leg seemingly forgotten, and reached for the dog's collar with trembling hands. Ranger pressed forward into the touch, his entire body now shaking with excitement. "Michael," Sarah called, concern evident in her voice. "Do you know this dog?" Michael didn't answer immediately. He turned the tag on Ranger's collar over in his palm, reading something on the reverse side that Lily hadn't noticed. When he finally looked up at his wife and daughter, his expression was haunted. "This is Jason's dog," he said, his voice barely audible. "This is Ranger Unit 437, Jason Mitchell's partner." Sarah gasped, her free hand flying to her mouth. "But that's impossible. After Jason died—" "I know." Michael cut her off, his eyes never leaving the dog who now pressed against him as if trying to merge their shadows. "He was supposed to be reassigned. The department said—" He trailed off, his hand absently stroking Ranger's matted fur. Lily looked between her parents in confusion. "Who's Jason?" she asked. Michael and Sarah exchanged a heavy glance, the kind adults share when deciding how much truth a child can handle. "Jason Mitchell was your father's partner," Sarah finally explained, her voice gentle. "He was a police officer, too. He died 3 years ago, during the incident that injured Dad." The incident, always referred to in those vague terms, as if naming it might make it happen again. Lily had pieced together bits of information over the years, a robbery gone wrong, gunshots, her father in the hospital, and afterward, his leave of absence that became permanent resignation. Jason was Ranger's handler, Michael added, his voice stronger now as he continued to examine the thin dog. They were inseparable, the best canine team in the department. Lily moved forward cautiously, unable to stay back any longer. "Is that why Ranger is special to you, Dad?" Michael nodded, his eyes suspiciously bright. "After Jason died, Ranger was supposed to be evaluated and either reassigned to a new handler or retired to Jason's family. I wasn't in any condition to follow up." His hand moved along Ranger's side, his security consultant's training taking over as he assessed the dog's condition. "He's malnourished, dehydrated. There's an old injury on his left hind leg that never healed properly." "Can we help him?" Lily asked. kneeling beside her father and reaching out tentatively to touch Ranger's head. The dog turned to lick her hand, his tail wagging even faster. "Lily," Sarah began, the caution in her voice unmistakable, but Michael surprised them both. "Yes," he said firmly. "We need to help him. He was Jason's family, and he was mine too. Once." Within the hour, Michael had made a flurry of phone calls. The first was to Dr. Elena Vasquez, a veterinarian who had worked with the police department's K-9 unit. The second was to Captain Thomas Walsh, his former commanding officer who had visited him faithfully during his hospital stay, but whose calls Michael had eventually stopped returning. "They'll meet us at the emergency vet clinic on Colorado Boulevard," Michael informed them as he helped load Ranger into the back of their SUV, the dog too weak to jump in himself. "Thomas says there's going to be a lot of questions. Ranger was reported missing from his new handler's home 6 months ago." "6 months?" Sarah repeated, her nursing mind already calculating the toll such time would take on a domesticated animal. "That's when Lily was at her worst," Michael finished quietly, his eyes meeting his wife's over the roof of the car. "When we didn't know if she'd make it." Lily pretended not to hear as she settled into the back seat beside Ranger, who had laid his head on her lap as naturally as if he'd done it 1,000 times before. She stroked his fur, noticing the way he flinched slightly when her fingers found a particularly matted spot or an old scar. "It's okay," she whispered to him. "We found each other now." The emergency veterinary clinic was a flurry of activity when they arrived. Dr. Vasquez was waiting for them, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her expression shifting from professional to shocked when she recognized the dog Michael carefully helped from the vehicle. "Dios mío," she breathed. "It really is Ranger." She knelt to examine him quickly, her practiced hands moving over his body. "He's in rough shape. Michael, where did you find him?" "My daughter did," Michael replied, nodding toward Lily, who hovered anxiously nearby. "In the park near our house." Dr. Vasquez glanced at Lily with newfound interest. "You've got a good eye, young lady. Not everyone would recognize a police dog in this condition." Before Lily could respond, a police cruiser pulled into the parking lot, and Captain Thomas Walsh emerged. He was older than Lily had expected, in his late 50s, with salt and pepper hair and the weathered face of someone who had seen too much of human nature's darkest sides. But his eyes were kind as they landed on Michael, a mixture of surprise and relief evident in his expression. "Thompson," he said, extending his hand. "It's been a long time." Michael hesitated only briefly before accepting the handshake. "Captain, and this must be the famous Lily," Walsh continued, his smile warming as he nodded to her. "Your dad used to show your pictures to everyone at the precinct." Lily smiled shyly, still keeping one hand on Ranger, who pressed against her leg protectively. "Let's get him inside." Dr. Vasquez interrupted, ever practical. "I need to run some tests, get him on fluids, and see what we're dealing with." As they followed the veterinarian into the clinic, Captain Walsh fell into step beside Michael. "We need to talk about how this dog went missing. Mike," he said quietly. "Randall Harris, his new handler, he filed a report, but the details never added up. Said Ranger jumped the fence, but that dog was too well trained for that nonsense." Michael's expression darkened. "Randall Harris, you assigned Jason's dog to Harris." "It wasn't my call," Walsh replied, his voice dropping further. "Orders came from above after you declined the option to take him." "I never declined," Michael said sharply. "I was told Ranger was being retired to Jason's parents in Montana." Their conversation cut off as they entered the clinic, but Lily had heard enough to understand that something important had happened, something that connected her father, this dog, and a tragedy that had shaped their lives without her fully understanding it. As Dr. Vasquez led Ranger away for examination, Lily noticed how reluctantly the dog left her side, looking back repeatedly as if afraid she too might disappear. "He'll be okay," Sarah assured her, squeezing her shoulder. "Dr. Vasquez is the best." But Lily wasn't worried about Ranger's medical care. She was worried about what would happen after, about who had the right to decide where he belonged. Because in the short time she had known him, she had become absolutely certain of one thing: Ranger belonged with them. The veterinary clinic's waiting room smelled of antiseptic and dog kibble, a combination that reminded Lily uncomfortably of her own long hospital stays. She sat between her parents on a hard plastic bench, her legs swinging anxiously above the floor. Michael stared straight ahead, his posture rigid and his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Sarah flipped through a dog magazine without really seeing the pages, her nurturing instincts clearly torn between her daughter's obvious emotional investment and her husband's palpable distress. "Dad," Lily ventured after 20 minutes of tense silence, "did you work with Ranger too, or just with Officer Mitchell?" Michael seemed to consider the question carefully before answering. "I worked with them both. Jason was my partner for 7 years. Ranger joined us for the last 3 of those. We were a team." "Like the Three Musketeers," Lily suggested, trying to lighten her father's mood. The comparison drew a small, sad smile from Michael. "Something like that." Captain Walsh returned from the reception desk where he'd been making phone calls, his expression guarded as he took a seat across from the Thompson family. "The department wants a full report," he explained. "There'll be an investigation into how a valuable K-9 officer ended up abandoned in a public park." "What will happen to Ranger now?" Lily asked, addressing the question directly to Walsh rather than her father. The captain's weathered face softened as he looked at her. "Well, young lady, that's a complicated question. Technically, Ranger is still department property. He was assigned to Officer Harris after your father declined." "I never declined," Michael interrupted, his voice sharp. "I was in the hospital, then on medical leave. By the time I was thinking clearly enough to ask about Ranger, I was told arrangements had already been made." Walsh held up his hands in a placating gesture. "I'm just telling you what's in the paperwork. Mike, we can sort out that discrepancy later. For now, Ranger needs medical care and a safe place to recover." "He can stay with us," Lily said immediately, looking to her parents for confirmation. "Right." Before either Michael or Sarah could respond, the door to the examination rooms opened, and Dr. Vasquez emerged. Her expression was serious but not grave, a distinction Lily had learned to recognize during her own medical journey. "Ranger is stable," the veterinarian announced. "He's malnourished and dehydrated, with an improperly healed fracture to his left hind leg that's causing him pain. There are also several old injuries consistent with mistreatment." Her dark eyes flicked meaningfully toward Captain Walsh. "Someone hasn't been treating this dog according to department standards. Thomas?" Walsh's jaw tightened. "We'll look into it. Elena, what's the prognosis?" With proper care, good nutrition, and some physical therapy, he should make a full recovery. Dr. Vasquez turned her attention to Lily. He kept looking for you during the examination. You've made quite an impression. Lily couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. Can we take him home? Dr. Vasquez looked to Michael and Sarah, then to Captain Walsh. Medically. He needs a stable environment to recover. The shelter isn't ideal. He can stay with us temporarily, Michael said. His decision seemingly made in that moment. Until the department sorts out what happened and decides on his future placement. Sarah raised an eyebrow at her husband, surprise evident in her expression, but she nodded her agreement. We have the space, and Lily has already formed a bond with him. Captain Walsh considered this, then nodded. I'll clear it with the department. Given your history with the K-9 unit, Thompson, and the circumstances, I think I can convince them it's the best temporary solution. I'll need you to fill out some paperwork. Though, as the adults discussed logistics, Lily slipped away and approached the examination room door, through the small window. She could see Ranger lying on a metal table, an IV drip attached to his front leg. Despite his obvious weakness, his head lifted immediately when he sensed her presence, his ears perking forward. He needs special food to help him gain weight properly. Dr. Vasquez was explaining when Lily returned to the group, and he'll need these antibiotics twice daily for the infection in his leg. The pain medication should be given with food. Sarah, ever the nurse, was taking detailed notes. What about his emotional state after what he's been through? German shepherds are resilient, especially ones with police training, Dr. Vasquez replied. Vasquez. But he may have trust issues, anxiety, possibly even PTSD. Animals experience trauma much like humans do. Michael flinched slightly at the mention of PTSD, a reaction not lost on Walsh, who studied his former officer with concern. We understand trauma, Sarah said softly, her hand finding Michael's. We'll give him the time and space he needs. An hour later, after signing multiple forms that temporarily placed Ranger in their custody as material witnesses in an ongoing investigation, the Thompson family led a somewhat steadier Ranger to their SUV. The German shepherd moved slowly, his left leg clearly causing him discomfort despite the medication, but his eyes remained alert, constantly checking Lily's position as if afraid she might disappear. He'll need a bed, Sarah was saying as Michael helped Ranger into the back of the vehicle. And bowls. Proper food. We're not prepared for this. We'll stop at PetSmart on the way home, Michael replied, his voice calmer than it had been all day. I remember what he needs. The pet store expedition was eye-opening for Lily, who had never before been allowed to shop for a pet. Her father moved through the aisles with surprising confidence, selecting a large orthopedic bed, stainless steel bowls, high-quality food, and a gentle harness to replace the worn collar. No toys yet, he explained when Lily lingered near a display of plush squeakers. He needs to readjust to basic comforts first. Too much stimulation could overwhelm him. Lily nodded seriously, absorbing this information like a student with a particularly important lesson. Like when I first came home from the hospital, and you kept my room quiet and calm. Michael looked at his daughter with newfound appreciation. Exactly like that, Lily Bear. You understand him better than most adults would. At home, They established Ranger in a corner of the living room where he could see all entrances and exits. Another tip from Michael that highlighted his forgotten expertise with working dogs. Sarah prepared a special meal under Dr. Vasquez's instructions, while Lily sat cross-legged on the floor near Ranger's new bed, not touching him but providing quiet companionship. "He's watching the doors," she observed as Ranger's eyes tracked her father's movements around the house. "He's assessing the environment," Michael explained, his voice taking on the instructional tone Lily remembered from before his injury. "Making sure it's secure. It's what he was trained to do." After Ranger had eaten and taken his medication, the family settled into an uneasy new routine. The German Shepherd dozed on his bed, occasionally startling awake and scanning the room before relaxing again when he located each family member. Michael sat at the dining table with his laptop open, but Lily noticed he wasn't working. Instead, he was looking at old photographs. Images she caught glimpses of as she passed men in police uniforms, dogs in training, award ceremonies. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, she overheard her parents talking in low voices in the living room. "Are you sure about this, Michael?" Sarah was asking. "After everything you've been through, bringing a police dog into our home?" "I'm not sure about anything," came her father's honest reply. "But seeing him today, knowing he was Jason's, I couldn't turn my back on him again." "Again?" Sarah's voice sharpened with surprise. "What do you mean, again?" A long pause followed, during which Lily held her breath, afraid to miss her father's answer. "After Jason died, after I was released from the hospital, they asked if I wanted to take Ranger," Michael finally said, his voice so low Lily had to strain to hear it. "It's sometimes done when a handler dies in the line of duty. Their partner gets the option to adopt their dog. But I was a mess. Sarah, the nightmares, the panic attacks, the pain. I couldn't even take care of myself, let alone a high-drive working dog." "You never told me they offered you Ranger." "Because I was ashamed," Michael admitted. "Ranger was there that day. He tried to protect Jason after it happened at the hospital. He wouldn't leave Jason's side until they forced him to. And when they brought him to see me, he knew. Sarah, he looked at me like he was asking where Jason was, why I hadn't protected his handler." "Michael, that's your guilt talking, not reality," Sarah said gently. "You nearly died trying to save Jason." "But I didn't save him," Michael replied, his voice breaking. "And then I abandoned his dog too." And the conversation shifted then, their voices dropping even lower, and Lily retreated from her bedroom door, her young mind processing what she'd learned. Her father blamed himself for his partner's death. He'd been offered Ranger once before and had declined out of guilt and trauma. And now, through what could only be described as fate, Ranger had found his way back to them. The next morning brought a new rhythm to the Thompson household. Lily woke to find Ranger had somehow migrated during the night from his bed in the living room to a position outside her bedroom door, where he lay like a sentinel. Michael, already dressed despite the early hour, was sitting on the floor beside him, his hand resting lightly on the dog's back. "He wanted to be near you," her father explained. "I heard him pacing around 2 a.m. and found him here." Over the following days, a transformation began not just in Ranger, whose physical condition improved steadily with proper nutrition and care, But in the Thompson family itself, Michael spent hours on the phone with Captain Walsh and other officers, piecing together what had happened to Ranger after being assigned to Officer Harris. Sarah, initially cautious about having a large dog in their meticulously clean home, found herself researching canine rehabilitation techniques and implementing them with her nurse's precision. But the most remarkable change was in Lily. Her energy levels, which had remained stubbornly low even months after her treatments ended, began to improve dramatically. She insisted on joining Ranger for his short, prescribed walks, her small hand resting on the harness beside her father's larger one as they guided the recovering dog around the neighborhood. "His leg is getting stronger," she observed on the 5th day, as Ranger managed the entire circuit of their block without stopping to rest. "So are you," Michael replied. And Lily realized with surprise that he was right. She hadn't needed to rest either, hadn't felt the bone-deep fatigue that had become so familiar. Doctors Vasquez made a house call on day 6, examining Ranger with professional thoroughness while making notes in his medical file. "His recovery is exceeding expectations," she told them, genuine pleasure in her voice. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up." "It's Lily," Michael said with unexpected certainty. "They've connected somehow." The veterinarian observed the girl and dog together, how Ranger's eyes constantly tracked Lily's movements, how he positioned himself between her and the door when someone knocked, how she seemed to intuitively understand his needs before he expressed them. "I've seen this before in therapy dogs and their patients," Vasquez said thoughtfully. "A kind of mutual healing. It's not scientifically documented, but ask any experienced handler and they'll tell you sometimes the right dog and the right person just find each other when they both need healing." On the morning of the 7th day, Captain Walsh arrived with another officer. Lily didn't recognize a tall man with a crew cut and cold eyes that assessed Ranger with what looked like irritation rather than concern. "Officer Harris," Walsh introduced him briefly. "Ranger's most recent handler." Michael's posture stiffened, his hand instinctively moving to rest on Ranger's head. The German shepherd, who had been relaxed moments before, went rigid under his touch, his ears flattening slightly, a reaction that wasn't lost on Walsh. "We've completed our preliminary investigation," the captain explained, deliberately keeping his tone conversational. "There are some discrepancies we need to clear up." "Such as why my dog ran away?" Harris interjected, his voice carrying a defensive edge. "These things happen, Captain. Canines are animals, not machines. Ranger was one of our most decorated and well-trained canine officers," Michael replied, his own voice dangerously calm. "He wouldn't just run away without cause." Harris's eyes narrowed. "With all due respect, Thompson, you've been out of the force for 3 years. Dogs change, especially after trauma." The implication hung in the air that Ranger had been irreparably damaged by witnessing Jason's death, perhaps becoming unpredictable or difficult to handle. Lily, sensing the tension, moved closer to Ranger, her small hand finding the soft fur behind his ear. "Maybe we should continue this discussion outside," Sarah suggested, nodding meaningfully toward Lily. The adults moved to the porch, their voices carrying faintly through the window. Lily remained with Ranger, who seemed unwilling to approach Officer Harris despite commands Michael had taught Lily to practice with him during the week. "It's okay," she whispered to the dog. "Dad won't let them take you if you don't want to go." But as she watched the adult's body language through the window, Harris gesturing emphatically, Walsh looking stern, her parents standing side by side in what she recognized as their united front, Lily wasn't sure her father would have a choice. Ranger might legally belong to the police department, and if they decided he should return to Officer Harris, the thought made her stomach clench with anxiety. Something wasn't right about Harris. The way Ranger had tensed at his presence told her everything she needed to know. "We won't let him take you," she promised Ranger, her arms encircling his neck gently. "You're home now. You found us for a reason." Ranger turned his head to look at her, his intelligent brown eyes seeming to communicate complete understanding. Then, with deliberate slowness, he rose from his sitting position and limped to the bookshelf across the room. With his nose, he nudged persistently at a low shelf until a book fell open on the floor, a photo album Lily had never seen before. Curious, she joined him, kneeling to look at the exposed page. It contained photographs of her father in his police uniform, standing proudly beside another officer younger, with a friendly smile and Ranger sitting attentively between them. "That's Officer Mitchell, isn't it?" she whispered. "That's Jason," Ranger whined softly, his nose touching the photograph with such gentle precision that Lily felt tears spring to her eyes. This wasn't just her father's former colleague or a faceless name from the past. This was Ranger's person, the center of his world, suddenly gone. She understood that kind of loss intimately, had faced the possibility of losing her parents during her darkest days of illness, when conversations happened in hallways and tears were hastily wiped away before entering her hospital room. The front door opened, and the adults filed back inside. Their discussion apparently concluded. Michael's expression was unreadable, but there was a tension around his mouth that concerned Lily. "What's happening?" she asked directly. Still kneeling beside the open photo album, Captain Walsh answered before her parents could. "We've decided that Ranger will remain here for another week while we complete our investigation. After that, we'll reassess his placement." Officer Harris didn't look pleased with this outcome, but he nodded curtly. "1 week. Then I expect my K-9 returned to active duty." As they prepared to leave, Harris approached Ranger, reaching out to pat his head in what seemed like a performative gesture of affection. The German shepherd backed away, pressing against Lily's legs. "Still skittish," Harris commented with a dismissive shrug. "He's been like this since Mitchell bought it. Probably should have been retired then." The casual cruelty of the remark hung in the air as Harris departed. Michael stood frozen in the doorway, his hands curled into fists at his sides, while Sarah placed a restraining hand on his arm. Only when the police cruiser had pulled away did Michael turn to his family, his expression resolute. "We have 1 week," he said, his voice steady with newfound purpose. 1 week to figure out what really happened to Ranger and to Jason. The kitchen table disappeared beneath stacks of files, reports, and photographs as Michael pulled out every document related to his final days on the force. His laptop ran multiple searches simultaneously, the screen flashing with personnel records and incident reports he'd managed to access through old department connections who still owed him favors. Sarah had cleared her nursing schedule for the week, calling in personal days she'd accumulated during Lily's illness but never used. The Thompson family was on a mission. Jason and I were investigating a series of high-end burglaries. Michael explained to Sarah and Lily as they sorted through the paperwork. Jewelry stores, art galleries, private collections, all hit with military precision. No witnesses, minimal evidence. "Why isn't this in the official report?" Sarah asked, holding up the thin folder marked Mitchell J. Officer, involved shooting. Michael's expression darkened. "Because officially, we were responding to an anonymous tip about drug activity at the warehouse. The burglary investigation isn't mentioned anywhere." Lily, who had been quietly examining photographs of the crime scene, looked up with the sharp perception children sometimes display. "Was that Officer Harris in any of the pictures from the warehouse?" Michael paused, his brow furrowing. "No. He wasn't part of our unit then. He transferred in from Denver County about 2 months after." He trailed off, unwilling to complete the sentence in front of his daughter. "After Officer Mitchell died." Lily finished for him, her voice gentle but matter-of-fact. Living with serious illness had given her a relationship with mortality few 8-year-olds possessed. "Yes," Michael acknowledged. "Harris came in during the departmental shakeup. Several positions opened up after." Again, he hesitated. "After you left," Sarah supplied, her hand finding his across the table. "It's okay to say it, Michael." Ranger, who had been lying quietly at Lily's feet throughout this discussion, suddenly lifted his head, ears perked toward the window. A moment later, the doorbell rang. Sarah went to answer it, returning with Dr. Vasquez, who carried her medical bag and a concerned expression. "Captain Walsh called me," she explained, setting her bag on the counter. "Said you were looking into what happened to Ranger after he was reassigned." Her dark eyes took in the investigation materials spread across the table. "I see he wasn't exaggerating." "Do you know anything about Harris?" Michael asked directly, setting aside a file. Dr. Vasquez's mouth tightened into a thin line. "Officially, I can only comment on the medical aspects of Ranger's care under Officer Harris. And unofficially," Sarah pressed. The veterinarian glanced at Lily, clearly weighing how much to say in front of a child. Lily met her gaze steadily, silently communicating her right to be included. "Unofficially," Dr. Vasquez continued after a moment, "I filed 3 reports expressing concern about Ranger's condition during his time with Harris. Weight loss, minor injuries consistent with excessive force during training, signs of anxiety. All 3 reports were dismissed by Harris's supervising officer, Lieutenant Parker," Michael surmised, his jaw tightening. Dr. Vasquez nodded. "The last time I examined Ranger officially was 4 months ago. He had a laceration on his right flank that Harris claimed happened during a fence pursuit. The wound pattern was inconsistent with that explanation." "You think Harris was abusing him?" Sarah said, the nurse in her recognizing the careful way medical professionals documented suspected mistreatment. "I couldn't prove it," Dr. Vasquez replied. "And without proof, it was my professional concern against the word of an officer with a rising arrest record. Then Ranger disappeared, and Harris reported him as having escaped from his secured yard." Michael turned to look at Ranger, who had moved to sit beside Lily, his body pressed protectively against her leg. "You didn't escape," he said to the dog, as if Ranger might answer. "You ran from something or someone." "Can we prove it?" Sarah asked, ever practical. "If we can't document abuse, they'll give him back to Harris in a week." Dr. Vasquez reached into her bag and withdrew a small electronic device. "This is a microchip scanner. All police canines are chipped, but Harris claimed Ranger's chip wasn't scanning properly at his last checkup. I'd like to see for myself. She knelt beside Ranger, running the scanner over his shoulders where the microchip would typically be implanted. After a moment, the device beeped, and a series of numbers appeared on the small screen. "His chip is working perfectly," she announced, looking troubled. Which means Harris lied in an official report. Again, Michael took the scanner, examining the number sequence. "This isn't Ranger's department ID," he said slowly. "This is a different chip than the one he was issued." Dr. Vasquez frowned. "Are you certain that would mean someone removed his official chip and implanted a new one?" "I'm positive," Michael insisted. "I have all of Jason's paperwork. Ranger's official chip ended with 5547, not 8219. A heavy silence fell over the room as they considered the implications. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to alter Ranger's identification, a procedure that would require veterinary expertise, access to microchipping equipment, and a deliberate intent to obscure the dog's identity. Why would anyone do that? Sarah wondered aloud. To hide something. Michael replied grimly. Something Ranger might lead others to discover. Lily, who had been listening intently to this adult conversation, suddenly spoke up. "Dad, you said Officer Mitchell was investigating robberies before he died. What if Ranger knows something about them? What if he could identify someone involved?" The adults exchanged startled glances, the question hanging in the air with unexpected weight coming from a child. But before anyone could respond, Ranger suddenly stood at attention, a low growl rumbling in his chest. His focus was directed at the front window, his posture alert but not aggressive, the stance of a working dog who had detected something unusual. Michael moved to the window, peering through the blinds. "There's a car parked across the street. Dark sedan, tinted windows. It wasn't there earlier." "Could be nothing," Sarah suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. "Or it could be someone very interested in what we're discovering," Michael countered, his old police instincts visibly resurfacing. He turned to Dr. Vasquez. "Can you document Ranger's condition officially, with timestamps and verification?" The veterinarian nodded, already opening her medical bag. "I'll do a full examination right now, photograph everything, and upload it to his secure medical file where it can't be altered." As Dr. Vasquez began her examination, Michael pulled Sarah aside. "I need you to take Lily to your sister's house in Boulder," he said quietly. "Just for a day or two, until I figure out what's happening." Sarah's eyes widened. "You think we're in danger because of a dog?" "Not just any dog," Michael replied. "A dog who was present at a crime scene where his handler was killed, who was then reassigned to an officer who mistreated him, and who had his official identification altered. Something bigger is happening here. Sarah." Lily, overhearing this exchange, moved to stand beside Ranger, her small hand resting protectively on his back. "I'm not leaving him," she declared with unexpected firmness. "He found me for a reason, Dad. We're supposed to help each other." Michael knelt to his daughter's level, his expression grave. "Lily Bear, this could get complicated. If Harris is involved in something illegal, if there's a connection to what happened to Jason, then Ranger needs us more than ever," Lily insisted. "He waited for me in the park for 2 days. Dad, he trusted me when he wouldn't trust anyone else. I promised him we'd help." Michael looked up at Sarah. A silent communication passing between them, the kind only parents of a seriously ill child develop, weighted with memories of other promises, other moments when their daughter's determination had proven stronger than adult caution. "We stay together," Sarah finally decided, "but we take precautions." By evening, the Thompson home had been subtly fortified. Michael installed the security system he'd purchased months ago but never activated. Dr. Vasquez completed her examination, documenting every scar, every healing wound, every sign of neglect in Ranger's condition. She left with copies of Michael's files, promising to secure them in her clinic safe where they couldn't accidentally disappear. As darkness fell, Lily sat with Ranger in the living room, watching as her father methodically cleaned a gun she hadn't known he owned. The German shepherd seemed calmer with each passing hour in their home, but his vigilance never wavered, his eyes regularly scanning windows and doors, his ears tracking sounds too faint for human detection. "How did you get away from Officer Harris?" Lily asked him softly, not expecting an answer but feeling the question needed to be voiced. "How did you find your way to our park?" Ranger turned to look at her, his intelligent eyes seeming to hold volumes of unspoken history. He pressed his muzzle gently against her hand. "I think he had help," Michael said from across the room, his voice thoughtful as he reassembled his weapon. A working dog like Ranger, even injured, wouldn't stay in one location unless he was waiting for someone specific. "He was waiting for me," Lily said with absolute certainty. Michael smiled faintly. "Maybe so, but I think someone helped him get away from Harris. Someone who knew he'd be safer away from the department." The next morning brought Captain Walsh to their door, his expression grave as Michael invited him inside. Ranger, who had slept at the foot of Lily's bed despite having his own comfortable bed in the corner of her room, padded into the living room to greet the captain with cautious recognition. "We have a problem. Thompson," Walsh said without preamble. "Harris is pushing hard for Ranger's return, effective immediately. He's got Lieutenant Parker backing him." "On what grounds?" Michael demanded. "We have documentation of neglect, evidence his microchip was illegally replaced, none of which matters if the department chooses not to investigate," Walsh interrupted. "There's something bigger happening here. Mike, Harris has friends in high places, and they're closing ranks." Michael paced the living room, his limp more pronounced with agitation. "This is about Jason. Isn't it about what we were really investigating before he was killed?" Walsh's silence was confirmation enough. "The burglaries," Michael pressed. "We were getting close to something, weren't we? Something big enough that someone was willing to kill a police officer to protect it." "I can't officially comment on an ongoing investigation," Walsh replied carefully, his eyes darting to Lily, who sat quietly with Ranger, absorbing every word. "But off the record, yes. And I think you need to be careful, very careful, about what you do next." As if summoned by their conversation, Ranger suddenly rose to his feet, moving to the front window with purpose. His posture changed, not the alert tension of detecting a threat, but the focused intensity of recognition. He whined softly, pawing at the glass. Michael joined him at the window, peering through the blinds. A woman stood on the sidewalk in front of their house, early 30s, professionally dressed, her hands thrust deep in the pockets of her blazer as she studied their home with unmistakable intent. "Do you know her?" Sarah asked, joining them at the window. Michael shook his head slowly. "No, but Ranger does. Look at him. He recognizes her." Indeed. The German shepherd's entire demeanor had changed. His tail wagged slightly, and he continued to whine, not distressed, but eager, like he was greeting a friend. "Stay inside," Michael instructed his family, retrieving his weapon from its secure lockbox. "I'm going to talk to her. Talk to—" "Michael," Sarah began, her voice tight with concern. "I'll be careful," he promised, checking that his gun was secure in its holster at the small of his back, concealed beneath his jacket. "But if she knows Ranger, she might be the key to understanding what's really going on." As Michael stepped onto the porch, Ranger suddenly bolted past him, moving with more speed and agility than he'd shown since they found him. Before anyone could react, he reached the woman on the sidewalk, not attacking but greeting her with unmistakable joy, rising on his hind legs despite his injury to place his front paws on her shoulders. The woman knelt, embracing the dog with evident emotion, her face pressed into his fur. When she looked up at Michael, her eyes were filled with tears. "My name is Rebecca Mitchell," she said, her voice steady despite her evident emotion. "Jason was my brother, and I think it's time you knew the truth about what happened to him and to Ranger." The Thompson living room had never felt so crowded with tension. Rebecca Mitchell sat perched on the edge of the sofa, her hands wrapped around a mug of untouched coffee. Ranger lay at her feet, his head resting on her shoe in a gesture of familiarity that spoke volumes. Michael sat opposite her, his posture rigid, while Sarah positioned herself protectively near Lily, who had refused to be excluded from the conversation despite her parents' concerned glances. "I've been looking for Ranger for months," Rebecca explained, her voice steady despite the emotion evident in her eyes. "After Jason died, they told us Ranger would be retired and sent to live with our parents in Montana. But when I called to check on him a few weeks later, they said the department had decided to keep him in active service instead." "That's not standard protocol," Michael said, his brow furrowed. "A K-9 who loses their handler, especially in a traumatic incident, is almost always retired." Rebecca nodded grimly. "That's what I thought. I started asking questions, but everyone gave me different answers. Lieutenant Parker said Ranger was too valuable an asset to retire. Captain Walsh told me the decision came from above him. Officer Harris claimed Ranger had adjusted perfectly to his new handler assignment." "Harris," Michael repeated, the name now carrying weight beyond a simple colleague. "When did he enter the picture?" "Almost immediately after Jason's funeral," Rebecca replied. "He approached me there, actually. Said he'd been assigned as Ranger's new handler and wanted to assure our family he'd take good care of him." Her mouth twisted bitterly. "He seemed sincere at the time." Sarah leaned forward. "But you didn't believe him? Not after I saw Ranger a month later. I insisted on visiting him at the K-9 facility." Rebecca's voice caught slightly. "He'd lost weight. Wouldn't make eye contact. When Harris gave him commands, he obeyed. But there was something mechanical about it. The connection wasn't there. And there was a fresh cut on his muzzle that Harris claimed happened during training." Lily, who had been listening intently, spoke up with the directness of childhood. He was hurting Ranger. Wasn't he on purpose? Rebecca met the child's gaze with respect rather than condescension. Yes, I believe he was. But proving it was another matter. Every time I filed a complaint, it disappeared into bureaucratic limbo. Every time I requested medical records, I was told they were confidential department property. So what changed? Michael asked. How did Ranger end up in our park? Rebecca glanced down at the German shepherd, who looked up at her with clear devotion. I had help from inside the department, someone who believed me, who had access to the canine facility. We had a plan to document the abuse over time, build a case that couldn't be ignored. Her voice hardened. But then Ranger came back from a training exercise with Harris with injuries so severe our contact couldn't wait any longer. They helped him escape, replaced his department tracking chip with a regular identification chip, and arranged for him to be temporarily housed with a vet tech outside the city. But he ran away, Sarah surmised, the pieces beginning to fit together. 3 days after his rescue, Rebecca confirmed. The vet tech came home to find a broken window. She thought someone had stolen him, but our contact in the department suggested he might have escaped on his own, trying to find Jason, Michael finished quietly. Or someone connected to Jason, Rebecca added, her gaze settling meaningfully on Michael. You were his partner. Ranger would remember your scent, your voice. If he was looking for safety, for connection to his past life. The implication hung in the air, interrupted by Lily's clear voice. He wasn't just running away from something. He was running toward something. She reached out to stroke Ranger's head. He was finding his way back to family. The adults exchanged glances, struck by the simple wisdom in the child's observation. There's more, Rebecca continued after a moment. This isn't just about Ranger's mistreatment, although that's part of it. This is about why my brother died. She reached into her bag and withdrew a sealed envelope. Jason mailed this to me the day before he was killed. It arrived 3 days after his funeral. Michael accepted the envelope with a hand that wasn't quite steady. Inside was a handwritten letter and a small USB drive. He knew he was in danger, Rebecca explained as Michael scanned the letter. He'd discovered something during your burglary investigation, something that implicated people within the department. Michael looked up sharply. Parker, among others, Rebecca confirmed. The USB contains evidence Jason gathered documentation of luxury items from the burglaries being moved through a shell company partially owned by Lieutenant Parker's brother-in-law. Financial records showing suspicious deposits to accounts belonging to 3 officers in your district, including Harris, Michael guessed, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. Rebecca nodded. Harris transferred in specifically to gain access to Jason's active cases, to find out how much evidence existed and who else might know about it, and to take possession of the one witness who was present for everything. All eyes turned to Ranger, who lay quietly at Rebecca's feet, seemingly unaware of his central role in a conspiracy that had cost his handler's life. But why keep him alive at all? Sarah asked, the practical nurse considering the cold logistics of a cover-up. If he was a potential witness, why not just... She glanced at Lily and amended her phrasing. Why take the risk Because a K-9 officer dying mysteriously right after his handler would raise too many questions, Michael answered, his mind racing through the implications. Better to discredit the dog, make him seem unstable, traumatized, unreliable, and if he eventually had an accident during training or a high-risk operation, well, that's an occupational hazard for police dogs. That's horrible, Lily whispered, her arms instinctively tightening around Ranger's neck. What I don't understand, Michael continued, addressing Rebecca directly, is why they didn't come after me. I was Jason's partner. I was there that day. A heavy silence filled the room before Rebecca answered. They did, Michael. The warehouse shooting wasn't random. It wasn't a drug bust gone wrong. You and Jason were lured there specifically. The color drained from Michael's face as the full implication of her words sank in. They meant to kill us both. Rebecca nodded solemnly. According to Jason's letter, he suspected the tip about drug activity was a setup. He tried to warn you, but there wasn't time. When only you survived. They had to improvise. Your injuries, your trauma, your eventual resignation from the force had all worked in their favor. A grieving, PTSD-affected former officer asking questions would be easy to dismiss. Sarah moved to Michael's side, her hand finding his shoulder in silent support as he absorbed this devastating revelation. All this time, he said hoarsely, I thought I failed him, that if I'd been faster, more alert. You were meant to die alongside him, Rebecca said gently. The fact that you survived at all was a miracle and a complication for them. The room fell silent, except for the sound of Ranger's steady breathing and the tick of the mantel clock. Outside, afternoon shadows lengthened across the front yard, casting the interior of the house in deepening gloom that matched the somber mood. It was Lily who finally broke the silence, her young voice steady with a determination that belied her age. So what do we do now? How do we protect Ranger and make the bad people pay for what they did to Officer Mitchell? The adults exchanged glances, the innocence and moral clarity of the question highlighting the complexity of their situation. Before anyone could answer, the sharp ring of Michael's cell phone cut through the tension. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. It's Harris, he announced, his finger hovering over the accept button. Put it on speaker, Sarah suggested, her nurse's instinct for documentation kicking in. We all need to hear this. Michael nodded, accepting the call and activating the speaker function. Thompson here. Thompson. Harris's voice filled the room, crisp and professional, with an undercurrent of barely contained agitation. I'm calling to inform you that the department has expedited the review of K-9 Ranger's situation. I'll be coming by tomorrow at 0900 to retrieve him and return him to active duty. Michael's eyes met Rebecca's across the room, a silent communication passing between them. On whose authority? He asked, keeping his voice neutral. Lieutenant Parker has signed off on it personally, Harris replied, a note of smugness creeping into his tone. The paperwork's already been processed. Captain Walsh will be delivering the official notice later today. I see, Michael said carefully. And the investigation into Ranger's condition. The evidence of neglect and abuse that Dr. Vasquez documented. A brief pause. Those allegations have been reviewed and dismissed as unfounded, Harris stated flatly. The department veterinarian has provided a conflicting assessment. The department veterinarian hasn't examined Ranger since he was found, Michael pointed out, his control slipping slightly. Irrelevant, Harris snapped. The decision has been made. Euro 900 tomorrow. Thompson, have the dog ready for transport. The call ended abruptly, leaving a tense silence in its wake. Ranger, who had lifted his head at the sound of Harris's voice, now pressed closer to Lily, a low whine escaping his throat. They're panicking, Rebecca observed quietly. Something's forced their hand. Michael nodded grimly. They must know you're here, or they've discovered the evidence Jason left behind. Either way, they're moving faster than we anticipated. We have to leave, Sarah said decisively, her maternal instinct for protection overriding everything else. Now, before they come for Ranger or worse. And go where? Michael asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. Somewhere we can make a stand, Rebecca replied, her eyes reflecting the same determined grief that had sustained her through months of searching for her brother's killer. Somewhere we can finally expose the truth. As if understanding the gravity of the conversation, Ranger rose to his feet, moving to stand beside Lily with the protective stance of a working dog on duty. His posture was no longer that of an injured stray, but of a trained canine officer ready to serve not Harris, not the department that had betrayed him, but the family who had taken him in when he had nowhere else to go. We have until morning, Michael said, checking his watch. Just enough time to gather what we need and disappear. Lily reached for Ranger's harness, her small fingers tightening around the sturdy material. We promised we'd protect him, she reminded her parents, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. And Ranger's going to protect us too. That's what he was trained to do. The truth of her simple statement hung in the air as the Thompson family began preparations for a fight none of them had chosen, but all were now committed to seeing through for Ranger, for Jason Mitchell, and for the justice too long denied them all. Darkness had settled over Denver by the time the Thompson family finished loading their SUV. Michael worked methodically, his movements precise despite the urgency of their situation. Sarah packed with the efficiency of a woman who had spent months living out of a hospital bag during Lily's illness essentials only, organized by priority, nothing forgotten. Lily sat in the back seat with Ranger, her small hand buried in his fur, whispering reassurances neither of them fully believed. Rebecca Mitchell stood in the driveway, her own car packed and ready. The cabin is about 3 hours from here, she confirmed, checking the coordinates on her phone's GPS. It belonged to my grandfather Jason, and I spent summers there as kids. It's not in any of our current records. As far as the department is concerned, it was sold years ago. And the road? Michael asked, his police training focusing on tactical considerations even now. Single access point, but with good visibility. About half a mile of private driveway through the woods. We'll see anyone coming long before they reach us. Sarah emerged from the house with one final bag, Lily's medications, extra dosages packed just in case. Do we have cell service at this cabin? Rebecca hesitated. Spotty at best. There's a landline, though. We'll take my satellite phone, Michael decided, retrieving the device from his security consultant's equipment. Direct line. Can't be easily traced or tapped. As they prepared to depart, headlights suddenly swept across the house, a vehicle turning onto their street, moving slowly with deliberate purpose. Michael signaled for silence, motioning everyone back toward the shadows of the garage. Ranger went rigid beside Lily. His ears perked forward, but he remained silent, a testament to his training and intelligence. The vehicle, a familiar police cruiser, pulled to a stop across the street. Captain Walsh emerged alone, surveying the loaded vehicles with a resigned expression before approaching the house. "You're making a run for it," he observed. Not a question, but a statement of fact. "Can't say I blame you." Michael stepped forward, positioning himself between Walsh and his family. "Did you know, Tom, about Jason, about what really happened that day?" The captain's weathered face seemed to age further under the weight of the question. "Not at first," he admitted. "By the time I started putting the pieces together, you were already gone from the department, and the official narrative was set in stone." "And you did nothing," Michael said, unable to keep the accusation from his voice. "I did what I could from the inside," Walsh countered, his voice low but intense. "Why do you think Ranger's medical reports kept getting flagged for review, despite Parker's attempts to bury them? Who do you think made sure Dr. Vasquez kept her position when Parker tried to have her reassigned? I couldn't move openly against them. Not without evidence." Rebecca stepped forward, the USB drive clutched in her hand. "We have the evidence now. Jason collected it before he died." Walsh eyed the drive with a mixture of hope and trepidation. "Then you're in more danger than you realize. Parker knows you're onto something. He's called in Harris and 2 other officers for a special assignment tonight. They're not waiting until morning to come for Ranger." The implications hung in the cold night air. Harris's call had been a misdirection, buying time while they organized a more immediate response. "How long do we have?" Michael asked, already calculating. "An hour. Maybe less," Walsh replied. "They're waiting for a warrant. But Parker has a judge in his pocket. It won't take long." Sarah clutched Lily's shoulder protectively. "We need to leave. Now. They'll be watching the main roads," Walsh warned. "Parker's smart. He'll have patrols at all the obvious exit routes from the city." Michael exchanged a glance with Rebecca. "We need a diversion." Walsh nodded grimly. "That's why I'm here. Take my cruiser, they won't stop a police vehicle, especially with my clearance codes active. I'll drive your SUV in the opposite direction. Draw them away long enough for you to get clear of the city. They'll know it was you," Michael pointed out. "Your career, my career ended the moment I let this conspiracy continue unchallenged." Walsh interrupted. A flash of the decorated officer he'd once been breaking through his compromised present. "Jason deserved better from me. So did you." The exchange of vehicles was accomplished with military precision. Walsh provided Michael with his service weapon and extra ammunition. "Just in case," he said grimly while Sarah transferred Lily's medications and Ranger's supplies to the cruiser's trunk. Rebecca followed in her own car, prepared to split off if necessary to further confuse any pursuit. As Michael slid behind the wheel of the police cruiser, Walsh leaned in through the window, his expression solemn. "When you reach somewhere safe, call this number." He pressed a business card into Michael's hand. "Federal prosecutor I've known for 20 years. Incorruptible. She'll know what to do with the evidence." "Thank you, Tom," Michael said, the weight of years of misplaced blame and suspicion lifting slightly between them. "Don't thank me," Walsh replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Just make sure Jason gets justice. And keep that dog safe. He's the only living witness to what really happened that day." With that cryptic parting statement, Walsh climbed into the Thompsons' SUV and drove away, heading ostentatiously toward the interstate that would lead north out of the city. Michael waited until the taillights disappeared around a corner before starting the cruiser and heading in the opposite direction. Rebecca's headlights, a constant presence in his rearview mirror. "What did he mean?" Sarah asked from the passenger seat, her voice low to avoid waking Lily, who had finally succumbed to exhaustion in the back seat, her head pillowed against Ranger's side. "About Ranger being a witness." Michael's hands tightened on the steering wheel. K-9 officers are trained to remember people they encounter during operations, their scents, their movements. If Ranger was present when Jason was shot, he might recognize the shooter, Sarah finished. The implications clear. Even after all this time, which explains why they couldn't just retire him to Jason's family, Michael added grimly, and why they assigned him to Harris specifically. "To keep him under control," Sarah whispered, "to make sure he never had the chance to identify whoever pulled the trigger." The city lights faded behind them as they took the winding mountain roads leading west into the foothills. Ranger remained alert despite the late hour, his head occasionally lifting to track movements outside the vehicle, his training evident in every vigilant gesture. They drove in tense silence for nearly 2 hours, the radio scanner in the police cruiser providing a constant background of department chatter. It was just past midnight when the first alarming transmission came through. "All units be advised. We have a report of a stolen police vehicle. Last seen heading west on County Road 27. Suspect is former Officer Michael Thompson. Considered armed and dangerous. Approach with caution." Michael exchanged a grim look with Sarah. That didn't take long. "What happened to Walsh's diversion?" she asked, instinctively glancing back at Lily, who still slept soundly. Either they saw through it, or... Michael didn't finish the thought, the possibilities too troubling to voice. Rebecca's headlights flashed twice in the rearview mirror, their prearranged signal for trouble. Michael slowed slightly, allowing her to pull alongside. Her window rolled down, and she gestured urgently toward a barely visible turnoff ahead. "Change of plans," she called across. "There's a different route to the cabin logging roads, not on public maps. Follow me. But kill your lights once we're off the main road." Michael nodded, falling in behind her as she turned onto what appeared to be little more than a game trail cut through the dense forest. True to her instructions, he switched off the cruiser's headlights once they were hidden from the main road, relying on Rebecca's taillights and the vehicle's momentum to navigate the rough terrain. The logging road was barely wide enough for the police cruiser, branches scraping against the windows as they pushed deeper into the wilderness. Lily stirred in the back seat, awakened by the vehicle's jarring progress over the uneven ground. "Where are we?" she asked groggily, her hand automatically finding Ranger's fur. "Almost safe," Sarah assured her, though the tightness in her voice belied her confident words. The road grew steeper, winding upward through stands of pine and aspen. Rebecca's car moved with surprising agility over the rough terrain, suggesting she had traveled this route before, just as Michael began to wonder how much farther they had to go. The trees thinned, revealing a small clearing dominated by a rustic log cabin. Rebecca's car came to a stop, and she emerged quickly, scanning the surrounding forest with obvious tension. "We should be secure here for now," she said as the Thompsons joined her. The property extends for 50 acres in all directions. Only the locals even know this place exists. The cabin was small but solid, built to withstand the harsh mountain winters. Inside, propane lanterns cast a warm glow over simple furnishings, a stone fireplace, sturdy wooden furniture, a kitchenette along one wall, and 2 doors leading to what Michael assumed were bedrooms. "It's not much," Rebecca apologized as they brought in their belongings. "But it's defensible and off the grid." Michael performed a security check with the thoroughness of his police training exits, sightlines, potential vulnerabilities. Sarah organized their supplies while Lily settled Ranger on a faded rug before the fireplace, the German Shepherd's alert posture gradually relaxing in the warmth and apparent safety of their new surroundings. It was only when they had finished securing the cabin that Michael finally connected the satellite phone and dialed the number Walsh had given him. The conversation was brief, the federal prosecutor asking pointed questions and giving clear instructions. "We email her the evidence from Jason's USB drive," Michael explained to the others when he disconnected. "She'll review it tonight and call us back in the morning with a plan to bring us in safely for official statements." "Will she be able to protect us?" Sarah asked. The practicality that had seen them through Lily's illness now focused on this new threat. "She's involving the FBI," Michael replied. "This goes beyond local corruption. Some of the stolen items were transported across state lines, which makes it federal jurisdiction." She seemed confident they could build a solid case. Rebecca looked only partially relieved. "And in the meantime, Harris and Parker know we have the evidence. They're not going to just wait for federal agents to arrest them." As if in answer to her concern, Ranger suddenly lifted his head, ears perked toward the cabin's front door. A low growl rumbled in his chest, not aggressive, but alerting, the sound of a working dog detecting something amiss. Michael moved immediately to the window, peering cautiously through the curtains toward the dark forest beyond. At first, he saw nothing. Then, far down the logging road they had ascended, a faint flicker of light appeared headlights, quickly extinguished, but unmistakable in the mountain darkness. "Someone followed us," he announced grimly, reaching for Captain Walsh's service weapon. "Get away from the windows." "How?" Sarah demanded, already moving to shield Lily. "We were careful. Rebecca said these roads aren't on any maps." They must have tracked the cruiser, Michael realized, cursing his oversight. "Department vehicles have GPS locators." Rebecca's face paled. "The cabin has a cellar," she said, moving quickly to a worn rug in the kitchen area and pulling it aside to reveal a trapdoor. "It's not much, but it's concrete-lined, secure." "Lily and Sarah go down there," Michael decided instantly. "Rebecca, you take Walsh's gun and go with them. I'll handle whoever's coming." "Absolutely not," Sarah countered, her voice quiet but steel-edged. "We're not splitting up." "Mom's right," Lily added with surprising firmness. "Ranger stays with me." "And I'm staying with you and Mom." As they argued, Ranger moved to the front door, his posture changing from alert to recognition. He whined softly, pawing at the wood, not the reaction of a dog sensing danger, but of one greeting something familiar. Michael approached cautiously, weapon ready. "Stand back," he instructed the others, reaching for the door handle with his free hand. He opened the door a crack, peering into the darkness. A figure stood on the porch, not Harris or Parker or any other officer, but a woman in her 60s. her silver hair pulled back in a practical braid, her lined face showing equal measures of concern and determination. "Mrs. Mitchell," Michael breathed, recognizing Jason's mother from funeral photographs. "Eleanor, please," she corrected gently. "I believe my daughters told you part of our story. Michael Thompson. But there's more you need to know about Jason, about Ranger, and about what really happened that day at the warehouse." She stepped into the light, and Ranger moved forward to greet her with the same joyful recognition he had shown Rebecca. Behind her, an older man emerged from the shadows, Jason's father, his weathered face so like his son's that Michael felt a pang of recognition despite having met him only once, briefly, at Jason's funeral. "We're Jason's parents," Eleanor Mitchell explained simply, "and we're here to help you save the dog who tried to save our son." Eleanor Mitchell moved with the quiet efficiency of a woman accustomed to crisis. She set a kettle on the cabin's propane stove while her husband, Frank, secured the perimeter, checking windows and doors with the practiced eye of the retired park ranger he was. Rebecca embraced her parents, the family's reunion tempered by the circumstances that had brought them together. "We've been staying at a motel about 20 miles from here," Eleanor explained, pouring hot water into mugs of instant coffee. "After Rebecca told us she'd located Ranger, we knew it was time to come back to Colorado." "How did you find us?" Michael asked, still processing their unexpected arrival. Frank Mitchell's weathered face creased in a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "This cabin has been in our family for 3 generations. When Rebecca was a teenager, we installed an emergency radio system after she got lost hiking once. Old habits die hard, we still check it whenever we're in range. And when we heard her vehicle on the access road, we followed," Eleanor added. "Fortunately, we arrived before your pursuers." Sarah accepted a mug of coffee with murmured thanks, her nurse's eyes assessing the older couple. "Those lights Michael saw was that you—" Frank shook his head grimly. "No. There are at least 2 vehicles on the logging road, moving slowly. They're being cautious, which gives us maybe an hour before they reach the cabin." Michael moved to the window, peering through the crack in the curtains at the darkness beyond. "We need to move the cruiser and Rebecca's car. They're too visible. There's an old equipment shed about a 1/4 mile back into the property," Frank offered. "Camouflaged for game hunting. Should hide the vehicles well enough to buy us time." As the men left to relocate the cars, Eleanor settled on the worn sofa beside Lily, who remained close to Ranger. The German shepherd watched the older woman with evident recognition and affection, his tail thumping gently against the floor. "He remembers you," Lily observed, her voice soft with wonder. Eleanor smiled, the grief of years momentarily lifting from her face. "Ranger spent every holiday with us when Jason was alive. He was family." She reached out to stroke the dog's head, her fingers finding the exact spot behind his ear that made his eyes close in contentment. "Jason used to say Ranger had a better memory for people than most humans. That's why they wanted to keep him away from you," Sarah realized, sitting across from them. "He could identify whoever was involved in Jason's death." Eleanor nodded, her expression hardening. "We didn't understand at first. After Jason died, we were told Ranger would be retired to us standard procedure when a handler is killed. But then the department changed their minds, claimed he was too valuable an asset to retire." When we pressed for answers, she continued, we hit walls at every turn. Lieutenant Parker himself called to explain that Ranger was adjusting well to his new handler, and that disrupting his routine would be detrimental to his recovery from the trauma. You didn't believe him, Lily stated with a child's directness. No, we didn't, Eleanor confirmed. Jason had warned us in his last phone call home, told us that if anything happened to him, we should be suspicious of the official story. He didn't go into details, said it was safer if we didn't know, but he made us promise to look after Ranger if something went wrong. She paused, visibly gathering herself before continuing. When they wouldn't release Ranger to us, we knew something was deeply wrong. That's when Rebecca started her investigation, with our full support. Michael and Frank returned from hiding the vehicles, their expressions grim. They're getting closer, Michael reported. 2 SUVs moving in tandem. Department issue, by the look of them. We don't have much time, Frank added, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to wilderness emergencies. We need to decide stand and fight, or use the back trails to escape. Fight with what? Sarah asked pragmatically. We have 2 guns against what could be a tactical team. 3 guns, Eleanor corrected. Retrieving a worn leather bag from near the door, she withdrew a shotgun with the ease of long familiarity. Jason taught me to shoot when he was in the academy. Said I should always be able to protect myself. The quiet strength in the older woman's voice silenced them all momentarily. Here was the source of the determination that had driven Rebecca's months-long search for justice, a mother's unyielding resolve to honor her son's memory. Before we decide anything, Michael said, I need to know everything. What really happened the day Jason died, and how Ranger fits into all of this. Frank and Eleanor exchanged a glance laden with shared grief and purpose. Show him, Frank said softly to his wife. Eleanor reached into her pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch. From it, she carefully extracted what appeared to be a standard police K9 tag, identical to the one currently on Ranger's collar, but newer, less worn. This is Ranger's original tag, she explained, handing it to Michael. The one the department claims was lost when he was reassigned. Michael turned the tag over in his hand, frowning at its ordinariness. I don't understand. Why is this important? Look inside the ring, Eleanor instructed. Jason modified it. Michael examined the metal ring that would attach the tag to a collar, noticing for the first time a small seam along one edge. With careful pressure, the ring separated, revealing a hidden compartment within the seemingly solid metal. Inside was a tiny micro SD card. A backup, Eleanor explained as Michael stared at the miniature storage device. Jason called the night before he died. Told me Ranger's tag contained evidence that could bring down half the department if anything happened to him. Said it was insurance. The warehouse operation was supposed to be routine, Frank continued, taking up the narrative. But Jason suspected it was a setup. He didn't have time to secure all his evidence, so he made sure Ranger was wearing that tag. After the shooting, when they took Ranger away, Eleanor added, they replaced his collar and tags immediately. Standard procedure. They claimed, but we think they were looking for exactly this. She nodded toward the micro SD card. They just never found it because Jason had already switched the tags. Michael connected the pieces with growing horror. The tag Ranger is wearing now. is a replica," Rebecca confirmed. "The original was hidden in our parents' home all this time. Jason mailed it to them the morning before the warehouse operation, with instructions not to tell anyone they had it." Lily, who had been quietly absorbing this adult conversation with remarkable focus, suddenly spoke up. "That's why Ranger recognized the tag when Grandma Mitchell showed it to him just now. It was his." The adults turned to the child in surprise, then to Ranger, who was indeed focused intently on the tag in Michael's hand, his head tilted in the particular way working dogs show recognition. "Smart girl," Frank said with gentle approval. "Nothing gets past this one." Michael carefully secured the micro SD card, his mind racing with the implications. "We need to get this to the federal prosecutor immediately. Combined with Jason's USB drive, it should be enough to—" His words were cut short by Ranger's sudden alertness, the German shepherd rising to his feet with ears forward, a low growl rumbling in his chest. This wasn't the greeting he had shown the Mitchells. This was a warning, clear and urgent. "They're here," Frank announced, moving swiftly to the window. "2 vehicles, lights off, approaching the clearing." The moment of decision had arrived. In the soft glow of the cabin's lanterns, the unlikely allies looked at one another, a wounded former police officer, a protective mother, a child still recovering from her own battle, a grieving family seeking justice, and a loyal K-9 who had traveled miles to find his way home. "Lily," Michael said, turning to his daughter with the gravity her maturity had earned. "You and Ranger need to go with Mrs. Mitchell through the cellar tunnel. It leads to a spot about half a mile east of here. Follow the creek downstream until you reach the ranger station." "What about you and Mom?" Lily asked, her voice small but steady. "We're going to make sure they follow us instead," Sarah answered, moving to her husband's side with quiet resolve. "We'll lead them away from your trail." "We'll keep her safe," Eleanor promised, gathering emergency supplies with practiced efficiency. "Frank will go with you and Sarah. Rebecca and I will take Lily and Ranger." As they prepared to separate, Michael knelt before Ranger, looking into the intelligent eyes that had seen so much tragedy, yet still held such loyalty. "Take care of my little girl," he said softly, his hand finding the spot behind the German shepherd's ear that Eleanor had shown him. "Just like you tried to take care of Jason." Ranger held his gaze with an almost human understanding, then turned to stand beside Lily, his posture shifting from pet to protector in that subtle way only working dogs can manage. Outside, car doors closed quietly as figures began to move through the darkness toward the cabin. Time had run out. "Go," Michael urged, helping Eleanor open the concealed trapdoor. "We'll meet you at the ranger station." As Lily descended into the cellar with Ranger at her side, she looked back at her parents one last time. "Promise you'll come find us," she said. Not a question, but a command. "Always," Michael and Sarah replied in unison. "We promise." It was a promise they intended to keep no matter what stood in their way. In the quiet moments of life, we sometimes find our greatest courage through the most unexpected connections. This story of Lily and Ranger reminds us that loyalty never fades, even when tested by time and tragedy. For those of us who have weathered our own storms, who have faced illness, loss, or betrayal, there's a profound truth in witnessing how this German Shepherd traveled miles to find not just safety, but purpose. Remember when we raised our children to believe in justice and taught them that doing the right thing matters. Even when it's difficult, Lily's innocence and determination mirror the values we've always held dear. As we watch Michael confront his painful past to protect his family's future, we recognize our own journeys of healing and redemption. This isn't just a story about a lost dog